what the culture behind it is. And, that's a resurgence in the new school across the board.
We're going to talk about 2000 to now. And what happened with 2000, well, I would say like from 99, the late 90s, house had a decline. It wasn't as popular. It wasn't as popular in Asia. It wasn't as popular in America. And there was just like, it was dance fusion. Most of the people from fusion, we were the ones still carrying the torch, pushing it, still trying to teach it. A lot of teaching was done in Asia, but still it was kind of dying out. What went on here was Tony McGregor, Which Way Sha started to jack. And when they started to jack, because jacking was something that wasn't done back in the days, this was something that they started in 2000. Jacking, the term jacking means fucking in the club. That's from Chicago, that's just a Chicago term. But they took that term, being Sha, Which Way Sha, and Tony McGregor, and also Brian Green. And what they did with that is they came up,
developed a motion.
A movement. Now, how it was explained to me with this movement, and this is important, was that they were trying to figure out how can we teach people who don't listen to the music and people who aren't on beat, how can we get them to understand the feeling of the dance? So they came up with that movement, but with that movement, a very important thing happened. It became popular. People all over wanted to become a part of house because the people who did hip hop, they kind of saw a similar movement in what they were doing, and that's how they were able to make the crossover. Like we say, we're all dancers, but then there's certain movements like the Roger Rabbit, like the crisscross, that skate, that cross over from dance to dance. So that was a movement that people who mostly listen to hip hop could really vibe with. And like I say, it became popular, so that for us, it kind of changed the dance. So we had to adapt with the times, where we were doing mostly footwork. Now we added mixed a little bit of jack, what we call jack, into the dance, and that changed the dance from what you see now. I don't know, now it's prevalent, it's everywhere, And so I think that's a good thing for me, because more people are interested in the dance. And now we can kind of like guide them, because now once they've learned that, now they want to go back and learn about the foundation.
Just to pick up on what he was saying, I think the dances are tied to the music. The decline of house music also led with the decline of the dance, because a lot of people weren't listening to house, like it was in the early 90s, in the late 90s. I think turn of the century, house picked up in Europe and in America with a different sound, a mixture of electronica and a more tribal sound, drums, and then what they call the broken beats. A lot of house picked up because they started doing what was called broken beats. Now that whole broken beat culture came about, alongside the whole jack thing. So you had jacking and the broken beat, and when you brought that together, the culture came back full throttle.
That and the techie music, like producers like Theo Parrish from out of Detroit.
Yeah, with that whole, that electronic sound, that's what brought house as a music back, and then the dance came back with it, on top of that. So what happens now is people, they look at what they see as house now, and they see similarities to other dances, other styles. And then that's, to get people to get into something, you got to give them a point of reference. So a lot of people's point of reference in house is through hip hop. For b-boys, it's through breaking. Alongside of, the resurgence of house, where a lot of b-boys were going to the house clubs in the mid to late 90s. A lot of b-boys got into house because they wanted to learn, the tops. The top rockin' house, was so, it appealed to b-boys because they wanted to learn how to get, how to dance. you know, and a lot of the b-boys, the younger b-boys, I'll use, you know, like Breaks Crew and Step Fiends as an example. Those are two crews out of New York. They had a lot of b-boys and that got into house and started mixing the tops and the steps of house with their breaking. And so one in particular, Shan S, who always, he was a b-boy first, you know, he took, you know, the b-boy that he knew and mixed it with his house also, and took house to another level. And that led a lot of other people to, you know, do the same. And this was all around the same time, the late 90s into the turn of the century. So a lot of factors contributed to what, you know, you see as a new school house resurgence. But again, it's always, you know, some of the same people, you know, involved in that. You know, a lot of the things, like, I'll use case in point, a move that comes from gymnastics that went into b-boying that crossed over into house, the hollow back. You know, the first time that, you know, cats saw a hollow back was b-boy Float. We were doing a video for Mariah, Fantasy, and Float, a lot of people don't notice, but Float was in that video. And what happened was Float was doing all kinds of hollow backs. Ejo is who saw the hollow backs that Float were doing, and Float showed him, and Ejo got into it immediately and started rocking the hollow backs. You know, and then other cats seeing Ejo do that, you know, started, and that's how, you know, that came into house, alongside of the same thing with like capoeira. You know, when b-boys saw a lot of the capoeira moves, you know, they saw the similarities. Well, house dancers saw a lot of the similarities in the jinga, you know, in house, you know, and so each style influences the other. You know, when you go back to that whole labeling thing, you can't label a person, you know, as something unless you know what that is. If you label, you know, somebody a hip-hop dancer, you have to actually know what hip-hop dance is. If you label somebody a house dancer, you know, you got to know what house is. House has its own vocabulary and culture. You know, a lot of misconceptions have happened over the years here in America, you know, turn of the century again, where a lot of guys dancing to house music in the club and are called house dancers, but they're not doing the dance that we're doing. You know, and that's another thing that had to be corrected. You know, I've seen videos on YouTube of cats, oh, he's house dancing, and blah, 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 and I look at that and they're just jumping around. And I'm like, that's not house. Not house. House has a culture, it has vocabulary, you know, it's the same thing. You wouldn't see it, you know, you don't call somebody that does this a popper just because they did a wave, you know. So, you know, that's another thing that's going on in the culture now. People really want to learn what, you know, what the dance is, what the vocabulary is, what the culture behind it is. And, you know, that's a resurgence in the new school across the board, not just in house, but, you know, in b-boying and popping and everything. People want to know their history. You know, you can't know where you're going until you know where you've come from.